Hello everyone, hope we're all well today. Welcome to the Friday Live. So I've got a few questions to go through. I'm going to crack straight on with them. The first one was the topic of making excuses to drink. It's weird how I always need an excuse. The excuses I come up with are often so lame anyone would be in a fit of laughter. So I think that's quite an interesting one. The point with excuses is quite often our decision making process is quite complicated, and quite often our decision to drink or not drink, the decision to drink is made before we consciously make a decision to drink. So what can sometimes happen is your brain jumps to the conclusion that you're going to have a drink before your conscious mind has actually caught up. I go into this in a bit more detail in Alcohol Explained too. But essentially what you do then, you are going to drink, so you just look for an excuse to do it. And you just basically rattle through any old rubbish to try and justify what you've already decided to do. And they don't really stand up to even the most cursory of examinations. I remember hearing from someone once and talking about drinking, and he said quite often he had this thing where he was saying pubs are closing down and publicans don't have enough money, and he feels guilty because if you stop drinking, you're kind of robbing them of their livelihood. Which I suppose to people who don't drink huge amounts, it might seem a bit weird, but to a lot of us, I mean, that can seem quite convincing if you're in the right frame of mind. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you are concerned about that, you're better off taking the 50 or 60 quid that you would spend drinking and just give it to them and not get drunk, because you lose the money either way. And then at least if you're not drinking the alcohol, you're not becoming increasingly addicted, ruining your night's sleep and sentencing yourself to a day of anxiety the next day and doing God knows what stupid things. And when you put it into that context, it becomes even more ridiculous, doesn't it? But just remember that it can be different. So if you genuinely make a decision to drink, then that's one thing. But a lot of the time, the decision to drink has been made, and what you are then doing is just looking for excuses. And you'll quite often recognise that kind of thinking because it tends to be almost like a panicked thinking. You're almost like picking up anything and discarding it if it doesn't justify your reason to drink. And that's the kind of thing where people talk about it being the fuck it button, where it's just like, oh, I don't care about tomorrow, I just want a bit of relief tonight, or oh, I've had an argument with so-and-so, they've really pissed me off, it's their fault. It's nonsense. Why would it be anyone else's fault that you're going to have a drink, no matter how upset they've made you? I hope that's useful. The next one is about self-image. I found the chapter in Alcohol Explained to be very powerful. So self-image, I think that is quite an important one, because when we're drinking becomes an integral part of our self-image, how we perceive ourselves. And we get sucked into that entire world. So quite often, if we are drinking a lot, we tend to look down on non-drinkers, and we kind of see them as kind of, I don't know, health fanatics or people who take life too seriously. And when you're out in a group of people, you see yourself as belonging to the group who are drinking lots because they're the fun ones, they're the ones that have, they don't care, they want to just enjoy their lives. When you start to understand a bit more, you stop seeing it like that, and you see those people as the ones that basically are just more addicted than other people. They find it harder to stop and they suffer more from the effects of alcohol. But the problem is, if you just stop drinking and then go out with that same self-image as a drinker, seeing yourself as the carefree one who drinks a lot, oh, but I don't drink anymore, it can kind of cause issues. So you do need to start thinking about who is the new you. A lot of the time when you're, people who are drinking, you look at the jokes that, the heavy drinkers, real or imagined in film and fiction, they kind of mock people who exercise, and, any kind of self pampering kind of gets sneered at. But you need to start changing that self-image. You need to start looking at other drinkers exactly. I see people drinking now. When I see someone having a drink, I don't think of them and envy them and think, oh, how amazing, wouldn't that be lovely? I see the increased heart rate, which makes them feel very lethargic and tired. I see the bad night's sleep as they lie there tossing and turning, as their brain chemistry gets completely out of whack. And I see them just feeling tired and drained the next day. And I'm not talking about people who are drinking way too much, or, you know, stereotypical alcoholics. I'm talking about people just having 1 or 2 glasses of wine, ruining their sleep and feeling rubbish the next day. Someone's posted a question here: how to break the never-ending cycle of addiction. So that's what the books are about. And I can't sit here and read the 2 books out verbatim, which I think kind of brings me on to a separate point. With the group generally, there are questions you have to answer now when you join the group, and they are either that you've read one or either of the Alcohol Explained books, or so either that you have read one or either of the Alcohol Explained books, or you will at least go onto the website and have a look at what is on there. Okay, so people have to answer positively to one or either of those questions to get on the group. But I think a lot of people are joining the group who have done neither. If you're in the group and you haven't read the books, please at least go onto the website and have a look at what is on there. Okay, you don't need to register, you don't pay, you don't have to give me your email address. You literally just go on there and look at what is on there. The first 5 chapters of the first book are on there. Okay, so there's clearly people posting in the group that haven't done that, but please do it, because 1, it's probably beneficial for you, and 2, it's a bit frustrating for other people in the group who have answers to a lot of the questions you're posting, or it's not particularly good. If you read the first 5 chapters and you think it will be helpful and you genuinely can't afford the books, then private message me and I will send you free copies. Okay, but I caveat that now. The only reason I'm able to do this is because people are sensible with it, and if they can afford the books, they don't do this. If I'm suddenly inundated with 100 people asking me for free copies, I will simply stop doing it. But if you are genuinely in a position where you cannot afford £5 for the book, then message me, and I will send you free copies. The next one is why alcoholism is really not a disease. Okay, so this is one that comes up quite a lot. The disease theory of alcoholism is very, very old, okay, and it just doesn't sit with what we now know about problem drinking and addiction. Okay, not to go into too much detail, but the concept of it being a disease is basically the concept that there's something inherently wrong with the individual, which is why they have to drink. Okay, the simple fact of the matter is that alcohol is a sedative, and when you drink it, your brain counters the sedating effects of it by becoming overly stimulated, so it can work while under the sedating effects of the alcohol. So when the alcohol wears off, you're correspondingly overstimulated and anxious. Okay, and the more you drink, the worse that is. That is alcohol withdrawal. Okay, and that causes the addiction. There is nothing wrong with any human being who becomes addicted to alcohol other than that they regularly take an addictive drug. Okay, and I think most people are well beyond this as a concept anyway, but it still does come up, and I think there's a thing at the moment about childhood trauma, and there's a lot around childhood trauma, and people who have childhood trauma are more likely to become addicted to alcohol and other things. Now, the fact of the matter is, if you have childhood or any other kind of trauma, or you have an underlying mental health issue, that is going to make you gravitate towards alcohol because it's a sedative. It dampens things down, it anaesthetises things. Okay, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to become addicted to it. You may have no childhood or any other kind of trauma, and you may have no mental health problems. If you drink and drink regularly, you will become addicted to it. It really is that simple. Do you think there will ever be a breakthrough, a cure to beat this addiction once it has hold of someone? I know stopping is, but people I know just don't understand how difficult it is, and that in itself is frustrating and makes it worse for me. I don't really understand that question, and again, it might be from someone who hasn't read the books or sort of familiarised themselves with what's on the internet. But addiction is when the addict genuinely believes that they need their drug of choice to cope with or enjoy life. Okay, there's a physical aspect to it as well, but people will get past the physical aspect, they will stop drinking and they will still constantly return to it or any other drug, and that is because they retain a belief that alcohol or any other drug, they need it to cope with or enjoy life. Okay, the only way to change that is to change how you perceive alcohol. So you put it in the I need it or want it category into the I just do not want this anymore category. Okay, and again, that's what Alcohol Explained 1 and 2 are all about. So I can't really say any more on that than what I've just said. There's not going to be a magic pill that comes along and cures it, because a lot of it is within your brain. It's how you see it. Over the years of your drinking, you become more and more convinced that you need this substance. So you can't take a pill that's suddenly going to remove all that learning from your brain. You have to put the legwork in to re-educate yourself and start seeing things differently. And again, going back to self-image, start seeing yourself differently as well. Someone's put here, I become quite sad when I think about not being able to drink again. Also, since I plan when I will drink, I tend to be in a better mood when I know I'll be drinking that night. Well, that I think goes back exactly to what I've just said. You're still in a position of thinking that you need alcohol to cope with or enjoy life. Why would you be sad when you think about not being able to drink if you don't want alcohol anymore? You're still in a position of being convinced that alcohol is an important part of your life, and you need to re-educate yourself, because the fact of the matter is alcohol as a drug is a depressant. Okay, it makes you feel slightly dulled and confused. It's not a particularly pleasant feeling. Okay, period. The only times alcohol is enjoyable is one, when it's relieving the previous withdrawal. So if you're feeling anxious because your brain's hypersensitive, because it's set to work under the depressing effects of the alcohol, and that alcohol is well worn off, when you take a drink, you're returning back to normal, so you feel better. That's the benefit of drinking for most regular drinkers. The other time when alcohol is pleasurable, apparently pleasurable, is when you're doing something enjoyable anyway, like socialising. So when you socialise, your brain releases endorphins that make you feel good. Okay, so when you drink alcohol at a social function, it's not the alcohol that is that wonderful euphoric feeling, it's the endorphins you get from socialising. And in fact, what the alcohol does as you drink more and more is dampens down those endorphins so you don't enjoy them as much. That's why I think the phrase drinking is borrowing happiness from tomorrow is complete nonsense. You're not borrowing happiness from tomorrow, because you're no happier than you would be otherwise if you weren't drinking, even the night before. What to tell other people why we aren't drinking? Should we admit alcohol was a problem for us or play it down? Alcohol got me into lots of scrapes, but most people probably just thought I was a party animal, and now I would think I'm boring. I'm just over 3 months sober now and not yet socialised with drinkers. This is a very personal thing. I mean, so some people are very open and they just say that, you know, they've got alcohol problems and they're not drinking anymore. I think if you can manage it, that's the best way of doing it, because that really puts the shutters down and you don't get people criticising you or trying to press you in to have a drink. But you can kind of create a bit of an atmosphere of people distancing themselves from you because they don't really understand it and they don't want anything to do with it. I personally don't do that. I just say I don't want to drink tonight, which is true. And so that's the way I deal with it. I think the problem is a few people will recommend sort of making, saying you're on antibiotics or you're driving or sort of making an excuse. But what I've found is whatever excuse you make, people will try and find a way around it. So if you say you're driving, they'll say, oh, leave the car and pick it up tomorrow. If you say you're going for a run, they'll say, oh, I'll have a rest day tomorrow. If you just say, I just don't want to drink, it may seem odd to them because people have fallen, society's got a love affair with alcohol and most people can't imagine anyone not wanting to do it. But actually it's a very difficult thing then to argue against, because what are they going to say? You do want to drink? Well, no, I don't, thank you. I just want a soft drink tonight. So I found that's the easiest way of doing it. But the other thing I would say is humans generally are quite egocentric. Naturally, our life is quite important to us. So when you think about going out and not drinking, you kind of get this view that it's going to be this massive problem, and as soon as you order a soft drink, everyone's going to stop talking and look round at you and you're going to be the focus. Most people don't care. Even close friends who you regularly drink with, their position is, as long as they've got their alcohol, they're fairly happy. And there might be a bit of banter or a bit of, taking the mickey a bit when you first mention it, but then very quickly the conversation moves on. And they start talking about other things. So I would say as well, don't build it up to be more than it is. You're going to go out, you're not going to take a poison, and that's it. And if other people don't like it, they can lump it, frankly. But a lot of the time, I think we think it's going to be worse than it is, and most people generally don't care. And what I would say is, think back to all the times you've been drinking. If someone was there that wasn't drinking, you might, as I say, you might take a mickey out of them a bit, but very quickly you sort of move on to whatever other topic of conversation is there. So these things generally blow over fairly quickly. The next one is how to avoid and deal with the risk of complacency and fading effect bias. So fading effect bias obviously is how we tend to look back on things in the past more positively than they actually were at the time. So when you stop drinking, you start to think of your drinking years more and more positively. So actually, as time passes, if you don't go about things in the right way, the longer you're sober for, the more likely you are to start drinking again, because you start really fantasising about how great it was to drink. Now, actually, it wasn't at the time, but because of this warped perspective, you start to think it was a lot better than it was. So for me, it's fairly simple. You just need to stick with the reality. A lot of this is, I kind of think of it as lazy thinking, just letting your thoughts drift without really trying to pin them down and do something with them. If you find yourself thinking back to how wonderful your drinking years were, then what you need to do is to get back to reality. Sticking with groups like this are quite good, because there's so many people constantly redoing their day ones and are miserable. And more importantly, people posting when they're drunk who are clearly miserable as sin, which puts paid to the lie that alcohol is borrowing happiness from tomorrow. It never is. Most of the time when people are drinking, they're fairly miserable. So that's hopefully covered that one off. Someone here, this is a great one. I was one of the ones who couldn't get past day 2 to 3, so I aimed for day 5. It's day 8 now. My psychiatrist couldn't believe I could do it, so it wasn't medically supervised. It was very rough, to say the least. So that's I think. Actually, it goes on at day 6. I watched a friend drink while I was sipping tea. Oh my God, I was so shocked that I've been like that in front of people. Starts off okay, then boring, so repetitive, then nasty, time to leave. And I think that's so true, because often when we think about drinking, what we're thinking about is the first drink, and we associate that with either the wonderful relaxing feeling, which is in fact the relieving of the previous withdrawal pangs, or we associate it with the endorphin rush we get when we're socialising. Whereas actually very quickly that disappears, and for the whole rest of the evening you go through that, repetitive and then nasty. It is unpleasant. And I find, for me personally, the hardest thing now about not drinking is the fact that 80% of the population do it. So a lot of the time when you're out, people are drinking, and people who are drinking are phenomenally irritating and unpleasant. Okay, and I don't mean problem drinkers. Even people who just have 1 or 2, they talk incessantly about the most boring topic because they find it interesting, and they become completely immune to you who find it uninteresting in the extreme, and that unfortunately is what it is. She goes on to say, it's going to take a while for people to believe I'm actually doing it, because I've fibbed for so long. I've permanently blown it with some, but I'm hoping a few will come back. So that's a very good point as well. If you have been in a position where you have said, I'm stopping drinking, you've gone back to it, and you're stopping drinking, you'll come back to it, you do blow your... people just don't believe you, okay? But they will, okay? Because as the day... So you're now day 8, okay? It's great for you, fantastic, but other people are expecting you to fail. You know you're not going to fail because you've set yourself up and you're doing fantastically, but they won't. But as the days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years, even those people who you say, I've blown it with, maybe you haven't, because if you turn around to someone and say, I'm celebrating 5 years sobriety, That's a very different thing, isn't it, than you saying to them, I quit half an hour ago, and then going back to it and back to it and back to it. But the question is, I have PTSD and depression, and now realise that alcohol was making things worse. So at some point, I'll be able to wean off most of my medication. But how long till the insomnia, and I'm on strong sleeping tablets, gets less, the anxiety too? I know we're all different, but this is really tough, but I'm actually functioning. Wow, that's such a good post. That's amazing to see. And again, just going back to the beginning, this is something I recommend if you're constantly struggling with day ones. Just give yourself a time limit of, say, 5 days. And I won't go into this in a lot of detail because I think I spoke about it on the previous live. But give yourself 5 days just to get yourself over that initial brain chemistry, and you'll find things a lot different. But to go to the question, so going back to the basic physiology, that when the alcohol wears off, you're kind of overly stimulated and slightly nervous, and it can turn into full-blown depression if you're drinking more and more. It also ruins your sleep, so for months and months you won't have been sleeping properly. And again, I've talked about that previously, so I won't go in in this one on it, but again, there's something on the website, so if you're not clear on that, go on the website and have a look at the article on sleep. But that's going to have a massive impact on your mental health. Now, a lot of people suffer from depression and anxiety and insomnia, and when they quit drinking, surprise, surprise, they find they don't suffer from any of those things, and in fact it was entirely caused by the alcohol. Some people, however, when they quit, they do have an underlying mental health issue of anxiety or insomnia or PTSD or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is, I can't really provide advice on anxiety and insomnia and post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. Okay, but what I will say is you need to stop drinking to be able to actually deal with it. So if you stop drinking, and again, so you're on day 8 now, it's still, from a brain chemistry perspective, it's probably still early days. And again, your sleeping's not quite back to normal as well. So what you will do, you may find one of two things. Firstly, as time goes on, actually all these issues were caused by alcohol. And I'm not saying the post-traumatic stress disorder would be caused by alcohol, but what you can find is these underlying problems seem worse when you are drinking, because the alcohol withdrawal, that oversensitization, makes everything look worse than it is. So you may find that you can deal with the PTSD without necessarily having to take medication. You might be able to go through counselling or something else that will deal with it, but you won't be able to get to grips with any of these things until you've stopped drinking. And in fact, if you go to a doctor, and people find this incredibly frustrating, but if they go to a doctor with depression and they're drinking, the doctor should say to them, I'm doing nothing until you've quit drinking. Because the problem is, when you're drinking, you're either drinking, in which case you're anaesthetising the problem so it looks fine, or you're in withdrawal, in which case it looks 10 times worse than it is. However bad it is, it's worse when you're in the withdrawal. Okay, and a lot of these mental health issues, we don't really, as humans, know a huge amount about them. And to deal with them, it's a very close working relationship between the medical professional and the individual, while they experiment with different medications, different ways of dealing with it to see what works for that individual. You cannot do that when you're drinking. So what I would say is keep close to your professional, your medical professional, and keep talking to them. You may find that as day 8 turns into day 18 and day 80, actually you can get rid of the sleeping tablets as well and things return back to normal. If not, and there are underlying issues, you're in the best place possible to deal with them, and keep speaking to your medical professional to sort those out. So there's how to best avoid the trap of answering the question, why have you stopped drinking, and ending up preaching to others. I'm new to the group, 6 months alcohol free, and my drinking style has been conditioned in the military, often leading to chaos. Yeah, I mean, as you all know, I was in the military as well, and it was hugely a binge drinking culture. It was ridiculous. And again, I think I've kind of answered the question on why have you stopped drinking. So I would say on that one, yeah, I think I've pretty much covered that up. But when it comes to preaching to others, it is difficult, isn't it? Because it's again, drunk people are really irritating, and when you start seeing things for as they are, you start to realise that people will be far better off not drinking. All I would say on preaching is it's often not well received, because until, generally speaking, people are very protective of their drugs, and alcohol being a common one, and because so many people drink, what you will get when you're out is, if 8 out of 10 people are drinking and you start to attack them, they will all be very defensive of their drinking, and it doesn't really go anywhere, so I wouldn't really bother with it. The next one is, I am 1 year alcohol free, but my son still drinks. I'm finding it so difficult to watch him wasting his life with alcohol. My grandson, his son, who is 7, stays with us every other weekend, and I worry about him seeing his dad regularly drinking. He starts with a beer around 4ish, then goes on to a bottle of wine. I know it's not much to consume for some people, but it is regular and very difficult for me to watch without feeling angry, sad, concerned. My son does not live with me, by the way. So that is a very difficult one, and I think there's a few points to make there. Firstly, you can sort of talk to people and give them information, and it might hopefully start to get them rethinking their relationship with alcohol. It's very difficult if they don't want to. I think you have to accept, difficult as it is, that you can't control everyone. And if someone is drinking and they have absolutely no interest in stopping, there's very little you can do about it. I agree, it's not good at all for the grandson who is 7 to be seeing that. And in fact, when I quit, so I quit 6.5 years ago, so one of my sons was 3 and one was 2, so they have no memory of me drinking. And it wasn't until after I stopped that I realised, with my 2 boys, they're constantly looking at you and trying to copy you and emulate you. And if they see you drinking all the time, that's what you're teaching them. You're bringing them up to drink. Now, with my 2, they may grow up and they may drink, but they won't be because of anything I've done, and that's all you can really do. I just think to myself, I don't drink in front of them. If they do grow up and drink, then I won't be particularly happy with it, but they are human beings and they'll have to make their own decisions, but at least it won't be something I've done. And in fact, I've stopped drinking alcohol-free beer in front of them because they're 7 and 9 and all they see is daddy having an amber fizzy drink in a glass with a head on it. They don't really understand that it's non-alcoholic, and I don't want them to see me, at a weekend sitting down relaxing with what appears to be a beer. I just don't want that. So as I say, and that may seem a bit extreme to some people, but I don't want to be a role model for them of someone who is drinking all the time. And as I say, it might be a limited impact it has, but at least then my conscience is clear. And I know I've done what I can to stop them drinking. But to go back to your question, it is extremely difficult, but you cannot parent somebody else's son, even if you are their grandparent. And difficult as that is, there's not much you can do about it. You can try talking to your son. You can try talking about, his drinking and what he's actually getting out of it, and how it will impact his sleep and his heart rate and all the rest of it. But there's limited amount you can do. You can give the information, but at the end of the day, he is his own person and it's his son. So I'm not sure if that helps or not. The last question then is wondering what your take is on those people that look to blame others for their addiction. Those that find it too hard to face the reality of their situation and choose to make it another person's responsibility. So that's a really good question. And the fact of the matter is, when we're drinking, so drinkers tend to be kind of when you're drinking, because of the effect it has on your brain, you tend to be kind of like really overly emotional. You're either drinking, in which case how alcohol affects your emotions is it dampens down the parts of your brain that regulate emotion. So when you're drinking, you can't regulate your emotions. So if something irritates you, it just turns into full-blown anger because your brain isn't working to regulate that emotion. Alternatively, you're hungover, in which case you're overly anxious and all the rest of it. So either way, you tend to be a very overly emotional, not particularly pleasant person. When you're in that state, everyone else is always to blame. So be it kids, wife, family, work colleagues, whatever, they do something completely benign and it irritates you and upsets you. And then, of course, you want to have a drink to take the edge off it. Now, what I would say is Nobody ever causes somebody else to have a drink ever under any circumstances, okay? Someone may upset you, they may anger you, they may betray you and leave you feeling awful. They don't force you to drink. They may cause an emotion in you, but it is down to you what you do with that emotion, okay? So, for example, you may be married to someone that you perceive as henpecking, irritating, unpleasant, angry, okay? They may be all of those things, but you have a choice of how you deal with that. You can leave them, you can talk to them, you can go for a run, you can meditate, you can do a million things. You are the one that has chosen to take that and drink your way through it. Okay, so that's my take on it. I've got no sympathy at all with, because I did it myself as well. But the fact of the matter is, there's a whole world of people out there and we all interact with one another. You know, we make each other happy, sad, angry, all the rest of it. If every time someone invokes a strong emotion in you, you go and drink, that's your decision, okay? That's not something they've done. And as I say, they may be completely in the wrong, but the fact of the matter is, it's you and you alone who have chosen to deal with that emotion by drinking. And I think that's the end. That's the end of the questions that were on the original post. I'll just see if there's anything here that I can touch on quickly. Sorry, it's a bit awkward trying to read it on a phone, and I think there's quite a lot of things here, so I probably won't get to have a look at any of them. So in future, rather than posting questions during the actual live, what's better is a few days before, a day or two before, I always post in the group. If you can post questions there, because then I can print them out and have them in front of me, because it's very difficult trying to read questions as and when it's going on. And also, I don't particularly want to drag these on too long. I think we've been half an hour now, which I think is long enough. So I hope that was useful. So what I'll do, hopefully next week, I'll post again on maybe Wednesday or Thursday to confirm the Friday session and the timings for it. And if you can please put questions there, and then I'll deal with them during the live rather than trying to read questions then. So thanks everyone, have a good week and see you next week.